The Great Plateau, the starting point of Link's adventure in Breath of the Wild, and the only area that we have seen close-ups of in Breath of the Wild 2's reveal trailer. Obviously, there is a reason for this, as the Great Plateau serves as a key lore location for the entire Zelda series as the birthplace of the Kingdom of Hyrule. This elevated piece of land, which was once the center point of Hylian power, before the many moves of Hyrule Castle and town after the original capital of Hyrule was destroyed by Ganondorf. Then inhabited by the ancient Sheikah, who left some of the most important structures on this elevated piece of land. As we've pointed out in previous videos, the absence of the Sheikah structures in the reveal trailer raises a number of questions. Since, with these ancient structures potentially gone, what purpose does Breath of the Wild have in store for the location from which it all started? And that is exactly what we'll try to explore, but before we do, make sure to leave a like and subscribe as we're about to take a closer look at the birthplace of Hyrule and its position in Breath of the Wild 2.
I believe in my heart that if all of us work together, we can restore Hyrule to its former glory. Perhaps even beyond, but it all must start with us. Let's be off.
The Great Plateau is no doubt the most important location in Breath of the Wild when it comes to the history and lore of Hyrule. Creating a champion makes this abundantly clear. It is the land of beginnings and endings. Beginnings, as this is where the ancient kingdom of Hyrule was first founded, when the light sage Rauru constructed the Temple of Time to hide the Triforce, a holy site to any Hylian even up until the era of the Wild, a place where pilgrimages were taken by those who were on a spiritual journey of enlightenment, as well as the place where Hyrule Castle used to reside before its many relocations, which in the era of the Wild ended up in the very north of central Hyrule's large green fields. At the same time, the Great Plateau was home for a number of ancient Sheikah, with some of them staying under its surface until the era of the Wild, waiting for the true hero of Hyrule. Naturally, the Great Plateau is also land of endings, as this was the location where central Hyrule ultimately fell with its king during the Great Calamity, with King Rome and his delegation of royal guardsmen, knights and civilians who fled from Hyrule Castle and town, retreating to this elevated piece of land to defend what they thought was the last Hylian stronghold. And very fittingly, a land of beginnings yet again, when the hero of the Wild opened his eyes after his 100-year slumber of restoration, to start his adventure to eradicate the evil that caused the downfall of the kingdom. So with this in mind, the story of the Great Plateau as of right now is incomplete. It served as a new beginning in the era of the Wild, but has yet to serve as an ending. As we have discussed before in our video regarding the possible return to Ocarina of Time in Breath of the Wild 2, the Great Plateau may just serve another crucial role in the upcoming sequel. This time not as a tutorial level, but the complete opposite. The final area and showdown location with the resurrected King of Evil, mummified Ganondorf. When trying to uncover the lore of the Zelda series, looking at it from a geographical point is futile, as Nintendo has clearly stated that they will alter locations and change their position on the map of Hyrule to keep the experience fresh and new. Indeed, visiting the exact same lake Hylia 10 times in a row would no doubt get boring, but when it comes to the Great Plateau, Nintendo has made sure to point out that yes, this is in fact the very same location we explored in Ocarina of Time. Of course, for reasons mentioned before, some locations differ and not everything matches up perfectly, but from a story perspective it explains how and why Hyrule went from a relatively small kingdom to the massive one we saw before the calamity in Breath of the Wild, accompanied by a huge boom in the Hylian population. That was until the Great Calamity ended it all.
Hey guys, Don Motion here. You may know me as the editor for the Inside Breath of the Wild series here on CR. Conrad's been kind enough to allow me to do a quick shout out for a project that I'm working on with a friend. We have just released our third episode in our comedy animation series called Charlie and Donny. This is kind of a niche project, so it's hard to get an audience for. So if you like this kind of stuff, then please go check it out. The link will be in the description. It'd be great if you guys can give us some support by subscribing, hitting the bell, all that good jazz.
To put the history of the Great Plateau brief, it started as the location of the Temple of Time, built by the ancient sage Rauru to hide away the Triforce in the Sacred Realm and thus maintain peace in Hyrule. Next, when the memory of the Triforce was gone in the general populace, Hyrule Castle was erected next to the temple, and with it came Castle Town, where the Hylian elite soon settled. This state of matters continued until the era of the Hero of Time, where the first castle and town was destroyed in all three timeline branches by Ganondorf and his allies. The castle was resurrected again as Hyrule Castle in the expanded Temple of Time in the adult timeline, but in the other two timelines, the castle, Temple of Time and town ended up as decayed ruins. The simple reason for this was that new Hyrule castles were erected elsewhere in A Link to the Past, A Link Between Worlds, Oracle and Ages, Twilight Princess, and finally Breath of the Wild. In other words, after the era of the Hero of Time and the era of no hero, the Hylians mostly abandoned the original capital, the current Great Plateau, seeking to establish their center point of power elsewhere, which as we have seen from Breath of the Wild ended up in the northern part of central Hyrule, with a castle that is far more majestic and grand than any we have seen in the past Zelda titles. But as the Hylians left the plateau, the ancient Sheikah tended to the land of beginnings. This connection might be tied to the Sheikah's spiritual tie to this particular land and the castle that once stood here. It is quite possible that it was them, the ancient Sheikah, who elevated the Great Plateau from surface level with their ancient technology, creating a highly fortified piece of land, which in return could have created a large underground chasm underneath it. With a large piece of land like this rising up, it makes sense that this would create a huge piece of empty space in between the original surface and the land that rose up. As we can clearly see from the Champion's Ballad, a large facility does exist underneath the Shrine of Resurrection. Who knows what other underground structures could be hidden inside this massive strip of land? The ancient Sheikah likely took care of the former capital of the kingdom, built the main Sheikah Tower connected straight to the command center in the new Hyrule Castle, and 8 additional shrines, as well as the aforementioned final trial deep beneath the plateau, with Monk Mars Koshia ultimately waiting to test a true hero when the time would arrive. It is clear that this area was the site of many ancient Sheikah activities, not only housing the central Sheikah Tower, but also as the one shrine that stands out from the rest, the Shrine of Resurrection, which would play the most crucial role when it came to securing Hyrule's future from Calamity Ganon and Ganondorf's grasp. The overwhelming presence of ancient Sheikah constructions in this area indicates that this was a very important area to both the Hylian and Sheikah leadership. But there is more. When the Great Calamity was set into motion, almost wiping out the entire kingdom, King Rome and his knights managed to make a final stand right here. The ruins of the Great Plateau give away the ferocity of this final battle. Page 397 of Creating a Champion reveals another interesting piece of information. It shows a map of the 3 most prominent evacuation routes for civilians who fled from central Hyrule during the Great Calamity, one of which ran all the way from central Hyrule's exchange and through the many outposts that reside at the foot of the Great Plateau. From there, they would continue east towards Fort Hateno, with Hateno village as their final destination. Eventually, the soldiers of the outposts below could no longer hold back the waves of guardians coming in from the north. As a last resort, central Hyrule's forces retreated back onto the plateau and stationed themselves in the Temple of Time as well as the Eastern Abbey. The entrance of the Great Plateau in the present has completely collapsed, and this might actually have been done deliberately by the Hylians themselves, just like what was the case with Akala Bridge, which was likely also demolished to stall the endless line of guardians striking Akala Citadel. This, however, would not grant them safety for long, as the guardians were able to climb their way up and end the Hylian presence in central Hyrule. After the Temple of Time was finally breached from its eastern wall, the last remaining knights, as well as King Rome himself, fell in the battle. It is possible, in fact, that Rome's grave to this day can be found at the very top of Mount Hylian. It is unclear who buried him here, but a king in spirit form never strayed far from his final resting place. The breaching of the Temple of Time and the death of King Rome and his soldiers at the Great Plateau officially marked the fall of central Hyrule. To this day, the Great Plateau remains fascinating both from a historical and architectural standpoint, showing the peak of the Hylian and Sheikah building capacity. If rebuilt as Hyrule's next capital, it could take up to half of its territory areas, which for the most part are flat and not too hilly to build upon. For your convenience, we have taken the liberty to outline the potential area of this new capital. When defended correctly, it would no doubt prove to be a fortress that will be close to impregnable, not counting climbing guardians. With a line of defense in the form of many outposts, scouts lookouts, the huge coliseum that could be outfitted with new cannon batteries, and of course the tall exterior walls of the plateau itself, making any siege and entry close to impossible. However, the Hylians were caught off guard during the Great Calamity 100 years ago, and with no cannon batteries on the plateau itself and their forces divided and fragmented from the carnage that took place at Hyrule Castle and town, they were unable to repel the siege and assault. Nevertheless, this doesn't mean that the Great Plateau, properly fortified and armed with the support of the Colosseum, can't be turned into an impregnable fortress or even capital of Hyrule. Princess Zelda's final speech about rebuilding Hyrule and restoring it to its former glory could very well suggest that we will return to the land where it all started, re-establishing a Hylian presence in central Hyrule. Because let's be fair here, the poorly located Hyrule Castle town is leveled. The castle is clearly not staying as we saw in the reveal trailer, moving Hyrule Castle, and without the castle there's really no point rebuilding ruined Castle Town. Creating a new settlement here as well as fortifying the area again would be a massive undertaking and might not even be worth the trouble. The area is flat and surrounded by mountains. Excellent high ground for any enemies that would want to come barging in. So instead, why not rebuild in a place that already has natural defenses, like the Great Plateau, secluded, isolated, way easier to defend. In fact, the Great Plateau's resurrected castle and town could stand in contrast to Tarrey Town's simplistic architecture with monumental brick and stone architecture and landmarks, a capital showing the power of the Kingdom of Hyrule, in the middle of all of Hyrule's major trade routes to Tabanta, Gerudo, Faron, Necluda, Eldin, Lanayru, and Akala. Plus, it will be located right next to Colombo Garrison ruins and Hyrule Colosseum ruins, which could be transformed into citadel and serve a similar defensive purpose as that of Akala's citadel, making any sieges of the new capital of the Kingdom of Hyrule nearly impossible. However, there is one important part of the equation that we have left out until now, and an important one at that: Ganondorf. Until more information surfaces, we won't know exactly how much time has passed between Breath of the Wild and its sequel, but the Hylians might not even get the chance to retake central Hyrule if a certain someone beats them to the punch. Yes, Ganondorf might actually realize the strategic advantage of the Great Plateau and land the moving Hyrule Castle right here, in which case get ready for the biggest, most complicated and dangerous dungeon and villain hideout in Zelda history. Imagine the malice-infested Hyrule Castle, but on the scale of the Great Plateau, both on its surface and underground. If and how Ganondorf would seize control of the Great Plateau remains to be seen, but the moving Hyrule Castle we saw in the reveal trailer might actually have something to do with it. As suggested before, we might even see Hyrule Castle return to its place of origin, next to the Temple of Time. In this scenario of Ganondorf's occupation of the Great Plateau, what options do the Hylians have? We already established that it's unlikely that Hyrule Castle Town will be rebuilt anytime soon. So instead of trying to return the capital immediately to central Hyrule before the inevitable showdown with Ganondorf, why not create a temporary base of operations? Say, building a new old monumental capital on the Great Plateau after Ganondorf is gone for good, but in the meantime, ally with the other races somewhere else. Say in the diverse and newly built by Link and the Bolson brothers Tarrey Town. A topic which Zeltic is covering over on his channel, so we encourage you to go and check that one out in the end card after this video. But before you go on, make sure to leave a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe and press that shiny notification bell for all notifications, as we have many more Breath of the Wild 2, Zelda, Nintendo Switch, Nintendo Direct, and so on videos on the way in 2020. Thank you so much for staying with us this year. Until the next decade, in 2020, this was the Commonwealth Realm, and we will see you guys and girls in the next year.